This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And this week, since it won our most recent poll, we're taking a look at some of the weapons in the Crysis franchise.
Oh, this is good. This is good, but also bad.
Make sure to subscribe and let us know what other games or guns you'd like to see Jonathan break down in the comments section below. Right, let's take a look at the weaponry of Crysis.
Okay, first up is a mishmash. I think is the word I would use. Basically, the frame is of the P99 stretched to make it bigger. Not anything in particular though, and the overall impression, especially with the suppressor or silencer fitted, is, and it's not this, but is this. If you've ever wondered how the HK Mark 23, beloved of many video games, it comes in a cardboard box, which doesn't seem to befit the gravity of the weapon, but nonetheless. And then in our case at least, we don't have the famous light laser module that the thing was designed for the US Special Operations Command, but we do have a compatible suppressor, which is rather bigger than the one depicted in the game, which has a very strange design with holes drilled in the outer casing, which didn't make a great deal of sense to me. But they've taken a big old chunk of P99 and mashed it together with big old offensive pistols, I suppose, is the idea. So the Universal Combat Pistol was a sort of personal defense weapon of sorts, because a pistol can be a personal defense weapon in the role-based definition of a personal defense weapon. And the HK Mark 23 was famously, it's described by, I think by the Navy SEALs, or one of them at least, as a crew-served pistol, because it's just so immense. Considering it's only 45 ACP, it is huge. And that's the scale I get from this. Kind of handles like a video game pistol, really. Not particularly remarkable. Dual wielding, of course. Go back and watch me attempt to do it, if you will. Not very successfully. You know, a super soldier in a combat suit, I'm sure you'd have no problem. From memory, this does not look in detail that much like an XM8. It's got a lot of extra lines and separate components on it that the XM8 from memory does not have. The overall silhouette, yeah, absolutely. There was, I believe, a different rail handguard for the XM8, because the standard version was some sort of weird socket port system for attaching accessories. I think sort of proprietary accessories would just plug straight in, I think was the idea, rather than what we have now, which is things like M-Lock, where it's a slot that takes a piece of rail that then takes the accessory. So you pre-configure the rifle to then be configurable for your missions, sort of is the idea. I think the makeover they've given the XM8 does sort of look right for the universe. So there are a few features of this that I don't fully understand. We have an operating sort of trigger group here. That means we can fire semi, we can fire automatic, so that's good. Despite this being a somewhat fictionalized version of an infantry rifle, it still has the ability to change fire modes. We also have a weird infinite supply of some sort of dart, which seems to be a piece of equipment attached to the rifle. Not really clear how that works. If anyone knows, let us know. Well, let me know anyway.
Give me a sit rep.
Read you, sir. We've got squid incoming from all sides. Gotta get someplace more secure. Find that suit guy?
Yeah, we got him. Stay put. We're coming to you.
All right, but make it fast.
All right, this is a grenade launcher equipped variant of this rifle, and we have some stats there which look roughly like reality, although we have this ammo, 4mm Sabo Scar. Interesting. That kind of implies the standard round for this is some sort of Flechette type round. I'm not sure. What's amused me slightly is that in front of the very chunky magazine catch on this thing are the words push release You don't generally need a description on the weapon to tell you what to press. I suppose safety at the back there might be somewhat helpful, but even then, well, no, to be fair, historically there's usually an F, an S, maybe even the word safe or safety, but not for the magazine, so that's slightly curious. Right, so the grenade launcher is fine. Doesn't seem to have the modern convenience of either a barrel that pops out to the side or a barrel that can slide and pivot so that you can load it, so that you can load longer rounds if necessary, or just for more convenient loading. This seems to be limited to the original M203 style slide it forward, shove in around, close it system. So it's like a sort of cosmetically different M203 in that respect. It's also quite proud of the gun, if you see what I mean. It's the way it's attached to the model makes the whole thing quite bulky, whereas modern grenade launchers are sort of designed from the start to meld better with the receiver of the weapon that they're supposed to go on. Slightly weird as well on this variant of the Crysis, I'm going to call it the XM8, is that we've got a bit of Picatinny rail on the top there, fine, on the carrying handle. We've then got a piece that appears to be inside the carry handle. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears to be inside. And there's no accessory small enough to fit that. Maybe a sling swivel attachment, but that would be not an optimal place to place the sling point. That's a bit of a strange design choice, and it's not on the XM8, I'm pretty sure.
The weapon seems to be highly destructive, being capable of mowing down hordes of infantry in just a few seconds. The weapon oddly features 10 barrels that hold 72 rounds of 4mm caseless ammunition.
Oh.
Yeah, each barrel holds 72 rounds. Reload replaces all the barrels. What was that? Do you remember that weird box gun that was bought
G9
with the bullets were like behind each other?
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, the Metal Storm. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
that's a good reference actually.
Mini Metal Storm. It's called it's called the Typhoon. Metal Storm. We've sussed
it out. Right. Are you going to put that in?
David, put that in.
So, really interesting gun. This. I very much approve of something different, but kind of based in reality with the Australian company Metal Storm, who came up with a variety of weapons with stacked projectiles, but caseless rounds actually, with their own propellant, so that there's no case to be ejected, and they were stacked in either reloadable multiple barrel containers like we see being reloaded here, or actually just in the barrel itself in the case of, say, the grenade launcher. Now, there'd be a problem there in terms of variable muzzle velocity, because the first one to come out is coming out of a shorter barrel, effectively. And I'm not sure they ever solved that, and probably various other issues. It was electrically fired, caseless, super high rate of fire, salvos of rounds. So this is essentially it. And yeah, maybe that's where the name comes from. And then the reload is a sort of little bit of a nod to the P90, I suspect, but yeah, it's kind of its own thing, and it's probably my favorite gun of everything we've seen.
Yeah, you want a hand? No, piss off.
I've now got the Crysis 3 version of the SCAR or pseudo XM8, and I think it's drifted even more away from the actual XM8. It's really only the sort of silhouette of the gun that's the same, and all the details look different to me. Notably, the cocking handle on the XM8 was the same as the G36, so you had the extension of the bolt carrier outside the gun, essentially, under the carry handle, and the pivoting sprung cocking handle on the front of that, and just the general sort of cylindrical shape of the steel receiver inside the polymer on this that isn't there on the, it's exposed. It's almost more like the pulse rifle, where you have the exposed bit of the Thompson gun that's supposed to be hidden inside the shell. Well, here we have what seems like a steel receiver buried in a polymer one. which is not how the XM8 was. It was like the G36. The barrel and barrel extension has the receiver molded around it, making it very, very light. This is in fact the Mark 20 Scar in universe. This is not really an XM8. It has that distinctive shape of the carry handle, and I think the earlier versions of the guns are maybe a bit closer to the real XM8. But by this stage in the franchise, it's clearly its own thing. The ammunition is supposed to be 4mm caliber, which is very small. But 4mm, that does imply, and the word Sabo definitely implies some futuristic ammo like they had in the ACR program in the United States well before the XM8. But the cartridge cases coming out of the gun look just like 5.56. Quite nicely modeled by this stage. And they're coming out in that video game perpendicular angle, straight out the side of the gun without sort of spinning. But they're coming out at slightly eccentric angles each time. So it's not like a procession of precisely oriented rounds cases each time, as in sort of graphically limited games or older games. They're changing it up, but they're still not quite, for all the very high graphic fidelity of the Crysis games, they're not quite capturing the dynamics of a case coming out of the gun. And I always come back to the explanation for this being, we want to be able to see the cartridge cases. And if they're kicking out at really quite significant speed, they'd be like a yellow blur at most. The amount of screen real estate we have to see this stuff coming out of the gun, you wouldn't even notice the cartridge cases coming out. So it's a compromise, I think. Okay, or should I say AK, because we have a sort of an AK here. Now, Dave has tipped me off that this is meant to be North Korean. So I have taken from the racks I think we're lucky enough to have 3 of these, an actual North Korean Kalashnikov rifle. How do we know it's North Korean? Well, apart from sort of chain of custody, you should just be able to see markings there. So the selector markings are Korean. Otherwise, the production differences are very small indeed. This is essentially a Type 3 Russian AK. Oh, except of course for the all-important markings on the trunnion, front trunnion, I should say, which you can hopefully make out there. So you've got the star in a circle stamp, and then basically the serial number, which is alphanumeric. So pretty unremarkable, but cool nonetheless to have a piece of North Korean militaria, essentially. But it does not really look like the gun on screen. This is drastically different. This seems to be some alternate future take. I almost gets sort of Cold War vibes from it, though. A little bit like the German Vega, East German Vega, which was sort of meant to be a more advanced AK design in the late 80s, with sort of greenish coloured polymer on it and a few bells and whistles. This is even more so. So this has what seems to be a machined top cover with lots of sharp edges. Well, it's not meant to be a robust base for optical sights, because I've just noticed the side rail. So it has a take on the conventional Soviet side rail mount, but this different. And then we also have the lower receiver is in 2 parts. Now, in universe, the reason for that might be a replaceable magazine well for different calibers, but it's probably just an aesthetic choice. Very big chunky pistol grip, slightly weird muzzle device, some odd furniture. It still has the machined slot, the mill slot that's on the actual pre-AKM AKs, well, except for the very first type that some of you will know about, milled in both sides, just to take some of the metal out where it doesn't need to be to make the receiver lighter. So this has a take on the same thing. So someone has used the AK as reference, and it's recognizably a Kalashnikov style weapon, but much like the other rifle, different in every detail. Yeah, and the case ejection on this is hilariously weak compared to the real AK, which is infamous for kicking cases out at a sort of, well, a forward angle at significant speed, because it's essentially always over-gassed, largely why it's relatively reliable. So just sort of gently tinkling out of the side of the gun is if your AK is doing that, there's something wrong with your AK. railgun of some kind, energy. Well, I say energy weapon. If it's a railgun, it's accelerating a kinetic projectile. I'm sure you all know by now. Not a great deal going on here. We've got these expanding blue lit rails. Are they the rails? Maybe. I appreciate the scopes are going to have standard reticles. In reality, you would need to match a reticle to the weapon type. Maybe with a railgun, you just ignore the range stadia that are on this optic, and you always just use a crosshair. I don't know. What I'm kind of getting at is that the railguns are supposed to be, hyper velocity projectile weapons. They ought to shoot flat out to their effective range. There shouldn't be any need to compensate, to hold over. But with your typical video game scoped weapon, if anything, that effect is exaggerated, and there's always a huge amount of projectile drop. Now, I haven't seen that in the gameplay footage yet. So as I say, maybe it's just that you're effectively slapping on a scope that's intended for a normal ballistic type weapon onto your railgun. The ability to swap out accessories on the move, by the way, I mean, if anyone can do it, a super suit wearing Special Forces soldier can do it, but I do wonder where his pockets are. Some sort of futuristic guided missile system here, command a line of sight system, or if you remember Half-Life and various other games, essentially you keep the laser on the target and the computer will guide the missile to its target. So it's not, they're calling them RPGs, I think, assuming that's what the character in the game is referring to. But RPG has become a generic term, I suppose, for any kind of shoulder-fired rocket launcher. But this being guided, I probably wouldn't necessarily call it that. What's written on the side is, in Korean, what I think is type or model 56. 56 being in Arabic numerals, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there, whether this is meant to be a South Korean futuristic anti-tank weapon or anti-whatever you got weapon, really, because you can clearly aim it at anything. Like if you can hit something in the air with it, hold the laser on it, it will hit the thing in the air. Better than an unguided system, but not by that much. I can't really speak to how this is supposed to be working. There's a great big cavernous hole in it. Looks a little bit overcomplicated for what it is, but it does look the part. I've also noticed that the munitions, the warheads, whatever you want to call them, that are being somehow loaded into this have written in English on the back, "Attention, do not stand behind." That's probably not the best place to have a backblast warning on the ammunition before you put it in the weapon. You probably want that on the launcher and in the training program, needless to say. But it's absolutely correct, whether it's a rocket-based system or a recoilless weapon, backblast from these things is significant. They are open at the back in order to handle either the rocket exhaust or the recoil of the round, if it's a recoilless weapon. So you do not want to be behind them, and you do not want to fire them indoors unless they have been specially designed for the purpose, because they will take out a wall or deafen and potentially hurt the people you're fighting with. So a slightly amusing video game version of reality there. This is ostensibly a different gun based on the name. It really does look an awful lot like the same pistol from earlier. Maybe it's the better graphics, maybe I'm just paying more attention, but my comparison to the grooves, if you like, is actually mistaken, because if this is the same as the other pistol of a different name, but the same design, then that is literally a groove down the side of the slide. Equally, I don't know why you'd do that. It doesn't take out enough metal to really make the pistol any lighter. I do like the wear pattern on the rear corners of the slide there. I've got a very nice still here where I've paused of a very well modeled cartridge case that's in full 3D. I can tell that because it's not, there are still polygons there visibly, but you have to look for them. And there's a very visible dimpled primer in the base of the case there, and some really nice lighting on it. That could possibly be the best 3D ejected cartridge case that I've seen so far in a video game. Admittedly, I don't always manage to pause exactly right to fully inspect them in all their glory. No, I haven't lost my mind. So I'm looking at the inspection screen for this Feline, which is actually a very cool design. Maybe a little busy in some ways, but I really like the look of it. It sort of manages to look industrial but futuristic at the same time. I think that's the contrast of the sort of phosphated or whatever they are, steel components, and the obviously polymer components, and the good lighting and texturing and everything. I always reference Weta Workshop with sci-fi guns because they do such a great job. Now, the bad is that they've called it a bullpup. So unless that's an in-joke, if we have a British developer who likes to go to the pub, it's bullpup. PUP, because it is a dated reference to what they used to call bulldog puppies, bullpups. This was a common turn of phrase back in the end of the 19th century, first half of the 20th century, and then the sort of slang term fell out of use, and we forgot why bullpups are called bullpups. But that's why, because it turns your normal shaped gun into a short, squat, arguably ugly, but still aggressive and ferocious weapon. I have a book on the subject if you care, and I don't blame you if you don't. Right, I've seen the back end of this thing now, and the magazine is attaching right at the back of the receiver, which gives very little space for feeding. However, we do know that in a museum in Russia, there is the Korobov TKB-022PM, which is the worst name for a rifle ever, I think, but a very intriguing design. The magazine also looks maybe a bit too curved for the rounds, but regardless, if we extrapolate the curve out to what the length it should be, you're going to start interfering with your own hand and controls of the weapon. This is the problem, or a problem with a bullpup firearm, is if your magazine's at the back. Same problem with a drum, it does get bulky and in the way. So I guess this is the game's sort of mini-me type machine gun. It does look to be equivalent to 5.56. The game uses different calibers, as we've noted. Unusually, there's a sort of guide feed slope going up to the top cover. I don't remember seeing that on a real gun before. You do get sort of assists like that, but that strikes me as a bit unusual. I'm not seeing, like, there are no very clear design references to any particular gun here, but it's very recognizably a contemporary-ish, near-future LMG design. I do appreciate the way he's sort of, it comes across in the animations as quite a chunky, clunky machine gun rather than a rifle. So it sort of helps to set it apart from an assault rifle. Then again, the guy's in a powered suit. Would you really need to slam it with that much apparent force? Right, I've just seen this is actually supposed to be 7.62. This machine gun, so maybe I'm missing the scale. The rounds in terms of proportions and scale look more like 5.56, but it's 7.62, which sort of explains its lower rate of fire, I suppose. It's meant to be 550, and it sounds like 550 as well. I think I'm noticing a bit of maybe an Israeli Negev vibe to the furniture on this, but not really. It's more of its own thing. Okay, so I've instantly forgotten what this is supposed to be called in the game, but it is basically an MP7. I think I've shown you this before. This is our only Select Fire MP7, and it's the early pattern that does not take 40-round magazines. We have a 40-round magazine. It doesn't fit properly. So that was the first revision to the MP7 was, among some other tweaks, reprofile the grip so it would take the curvature of a 40-round mag. But the gun in the game is clearly inspired by the MP7, even down to the angle of the trigger guard, the distinctive ears of the cocking handle or charging handle. They've just changed up all of the different features. It's even got the same, I don't know if you can see this, the same sling loops on the rear of the receiver, or something very similar to it. The stock's missing, and something in its place that I don't know what it is. So the angle of the receiver is different. The real gun just has a straight back plate, essentially. And it handles kind of how you'd expect, except without a stock. It ought to be a bit more all over the place. But we have a special suit to handle that, I guess. So it ends up being like a one-hand, I think, is it one hand or is he firing it with two? Hard to say, but those were the guns of the Crysis franchise. I must admit, I've yet to play any of those. I know, to my eternal shame, but some interesting stuff in there. We hope you enjoyed that. As you know, I'm from the Royal Armouries. Please do come and check out our website, our social media channels, and come and visit the museums that we have here in the UK if you can. In any case, we will see you again next time.